new report released by special counsel John Durham concludes the FBI should never have launched its 2016 Russia investigation in the first place. Durham, who was picked by the Trump administration, writes that the over 300-page report details a 4-year probe, which yielded very little in terms of prosecutions. He adds, quote, the FBI used raw, unanalyzed, and uncorroborated intelligence and, quote, ignored material information that did not support the narrative of a collusive relationship between Trump and Russia. We should know this report is at odds with the 2019 DOJ Inspector General's findings that there was a basis, a legitimate reason to open this investigation. So let's talk about it with CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andy McCabe. He's the former deputy director of the FBI, and importantly, he oversaw what became known as a Crossfire Hurricane probe into Trump in 2016. And Andy, your name is in this report almost 60 times, 58 times. Good morning.
Morning.
In your words, you were, quote, deeply involved in the decision to open the investigation. John Durham says that you shouldn't have launched it. What's your response?
John Durham is wrong. That's not just me that says that. Every other entity that's investigated our activities in 2016 agrees. And that's, of course, as you mentioned, the DOJ Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, as well as the Senate Intelligence Committee, led, of course, at the time by a Republican. So this report, Poppy, stands as an anomaly. I have my own theories as to why it stands as an anomaly. I don't think this investigation was legitimate from its inception.
Why?
Simply because John Durham made clear from the very beginning, shortly after he was appointed, exactly what he was going to conclude. He's made public remarks indicating that he thought that we had possibly broken the law and inappropriately investigated the president, which is an odd thing for any then U.S. attorney to do at the beginning of an investigation. He's echoed the same sentiments of his boss, William Barr, who was Attorney General at the time. So I don't think it's surprising where the report came out. It's disappointing, and it continues to fuel a false narrative about alleged FBI malfeasance that continues to this day, almost 7 years after the events in question. But, you know, it's, as I said, I'm not surprised.
I'll note at the time that he was appointed by Bill Barr, Democratic senator of Connecticut, where obviously Durham practiced and practices. Chris Murphy told CNN he had a, quote, reputation of being apolitical and serious. So among the things that he concluded is he says the FBI, under your purview in this investigation, displayed a, quote, lack of analytical rigor. That's a quote. He also said that you used, quote, raw, unanalyzed, and uncorroborated intelligence to launch the investigation. It makes the accusation that essentially you guys used different standards for which to launch this as opposed to probe into Hillary Clinton. What's your response?
Yeah, that's entirely inaccurate. You've got a lot packed into that question, so I'll address a couple of those points if that's okay. The investigation was initiated not based on raw, uncorroborated intelligence, but on significant understanding and awareness of what the Russians were doing in their multi-pronged effort to influence the 2016 election. We knew the Russians had been targeting us in cyberspace. We knew the Russians had been going after and stealing electronic information from our political institutions, from government institutions for over a year until the beginning of 2016. We knew they targeted the DNC and exfiltrated an enormous amount of information about Hillary Clinton. And then we knew that the Russians used that information in an effort to impact the election by releasing those emails on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. We only found out later, at the end of July, that prior to weaponizing that information, they'd made essentially an offer to the Trump campaign that they had information about Hillary Clinton and that they would use it to benefit the Trump campaign. So with that understanding of what the Russians were doing, we had the question, the very real and very significant question of whether or not members of a domestic political campaign had conspired with or taken assistance from the Russians. We didn't know if they had, we didn't know who that might have been, but we knew that it was something that had to be investigated. That's the opening of the case that, as I said, the IG and other investigative entities approved of that action in hindsight.
And he also included in Durham's report are disparaging text messages about former President Trump. I'll just highlight this one. We can show our viewers. This was on August 15th, 2016, about 2 weeks after the investigation was launched between two key team members, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Here it is, quote, "I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he," meaning Trump, "gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event that you die before you're 40. That obviously has gotten a lot of attention for many years. You said last night to my colleague Anderson Cooper, look, that was, quote, "objectionable and unfortunate." Is there a lesson learned for the agency writ large from exchanges like that?
I think there's a lot of lessons learned for the agency, and certainly for those two individuals who were involved in those communications. If you're asking me, did the agency learn that they should now monitor the private communications of all their employees to safeguard against the occurrences like this? No, I don't believe that's true. But there's no place in the FBI for people involved in an investigation to be approaching that work from a politically motivated standpoint. And I can tell you right now that at no time did I or anyone, to my knowledge, understand that Peter Strzok or Lisa Page harbored were having those sorts of conversations. Neither of the two of them ever gave me or anyone else that I'm aware of any indication that their work on this investigation was being influenced by their personal opinions. So, and that stands to this day.
And just to put a button on it, because of the point you made up in terms of not letting anything in terms of personal political beliefs interfere with the work that is done, I thought it was interesting that in this report, Durham suggested creating a sort of a position for a nonpartisan FBI lawyer or agent who would essentially step in and oversee and help put checks on anything that would be deemed a politically sensitive investigation. Do you think that's a good idea?
It's not a bad idea, but I don't think it's necessary. I mean, look, that person, that role, that voice exists in the FBI to today. And that's the general counsel of the FBI. And the staff of the general counsel's office include dozens of attorneys who do nothing but advise the FBI on the implications of their national security work. Those people, Jim Baker, who was general counsel at the time, and many of the lawyers who worked for him were present in all of the meetings in which opening this investigation and conducting this investigative matter were discussed. And we had those conversations about what the implications would be, the legality of what we were doing, the authority behind the steps that we were taking. So those conversations happened. If Mr. Durham, in a failure to come up with any other significant recommendations, is suggesting that the FBI should have another lawyer, I think that's great. They should have another lawyer. I'm sure they have plenty of work to do. But those kind of conversations, that sort of oversight that he's suggesting is already taking place and has always taken place in the FBI.
Andrew McCabe, thank you very, very much. Obviously, you were critical in this investigation. Appreciate you answering questions this morning.